stories, the horror stories and ghost stories from Ireland from back in the day. These these stories were told in the 1800s, in the late 1800s. So they've been going around a long, long time, and there's um, some that I've done previously, and I've had some a week or two ago. So if you want to go back, if you enjoy what you're hearing now and you want to go back and listen to the other ones, you're welcome to do so. So I shall start. Near Blanchardstown, County Dublin, is a house occupied at present, or up to very recently, by a private family. It was formerly a monastery, and there are said to be secret passages in it. Once a servant ironing in the kitchen saw a figure of a nun approach the kitchen window and look in. Our informant was also told by a friend, now dead, who had it from the lady of the house, that once night falls no doors can be kept closed. If anyone shuts them, almost immediately they're flung open again with the greatest violence and apparent anger. If left open, then there's no trouble or noise. But light footsteps are heard, and there is a vague feeling of people passing to and from. The persons inhabiting the house are matter of fact, unimaginative people who speak of this as if it were an everyday affair. Ah, so long as we leave the doors unclosed, they don't harm us. Why should we be afraid of them? Mrs. of the house said. Truly a most philosophical attitude to adopt. Another haunted house in Kingstown, County Dublin, was investigated by Professor W. Barrett as Professor and Professor Henry Sidgwick. The story is singularly well attested, as one might expect from this its being inserted in the passage of the proceedings SPR 3. As the apparition was seen on the three distinct occasions and by three separate persons who were all personally known to the above gentlemen. The house in which the following occurrences took place is described as being a very old one, with unusually thick walls. The lady saw her strange visitant in her bedroom. She says, "Disliking cross lights, I had got into the habit of having the blind of the back window drawn and the shutters closed at night, and of leaving the blind raised and the shutters opened towards the front, liking to see the trees and sky when I awakened. Opening my eyes, now one morning I saw right before me, this occurred in July 1873, the figure of a woman stooping down and apparently looking at me. Her head and shoulders were wrapped in a common woolen shawl. Her arms were folded, and they were also wrapped, as if for warmth. In the shawl, I looked at her in my horror and dared not cry out lest I might move the awful thing to speech or action. Behind her head I saw the window and the growing dawn, the looking glass upon the toilet table, and the furniture in that part of the room. After what may have been only seconds, but the duration of this vision I cannot judge, she raised herself and went back towards the window, stood at the toilet table, and gradually vanished. I mean, she grew by degrees transparent, and that through the shawl and the grey dress she wore I saw white muslin of the table cover again, and at last saw that only in the place where she had stood. The lady lay motionless with terror until the servant came in to call her. The only other occupants of the house at the time were her brother and the servant, to neither of whom did she make any mention of the circumstance, fearing that the former would laugh at her and the latter give notice. Exactly a fortnight later, while sitting at breakfast, she noticed that her brother seemed out of sorts, but did not eat. On asking him if anything was the matter, he answered, "I've had a horrid bad nightmare. Indeed, it was no nightmare. I saw it nearly this morning just as distinctly as I can see you." "What?" she asked. "A villainous look. A villainous looking hag," he replied, "with her head and arms wrapped in a cloak, stooping over me and looking at me like this." He got up, folded his arms, and put himself in the exact posture of the vision, whereupon she informed him of what she herself had seen a fortnight previously. About 4 years later, in the same month, the lady's married sister and two children were alone in the house. The eldest child, a boy of about 4 or 5 years, asked for a drink, and his mother went to fetch it, desiring him to remain in the dining room until her return. Coming back, she met the boy pale and trembling. On asking him why he left the room, he replied, "Who is that woman? Who is that woman?" "Where?" she asked. "The woman who went upstairs," he replied. So agitated was he that she took him by the hand and went upstairs to search. But no one was to be found, though he still maintained that that woman went up those stairs. A friend of the family subsequently told them that a woman had been killed in that house many years previously, that it was reported to be haunted. Well, that's the end of the Dublin stories. So we're going to go on to the next one, haunted houses in Clon's. From a very early period, a division of Ireland into two halves existed. This was traditionally believed to have been by Con, the Hundred Fighter, and Moy Nuda in AD 166. The north was in consequence known as Con's half, and the south as Mo's half. The line of division being a series of gravelled hills extending from Dublin to Galway. This division we have followed, except that we have included the whole of the counties of the whole of the counties of Westmeath and Galway in the northern portion. We had hoped originally to have had 4 chapters on haunted houses, one for each of the 4 provinces, but for lack of material from Connacht, we have been forced to adapt the plan on which chapters 1 to 3 are arranged. Um, that to, that to me is very strange. Um, the 4 provinces in Ireland are Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connacht. And Connacht would be on the west coast of Ireland, which they have the Gaeltacht and all the old ruins, and Clonmacnoise would be over that way. Ireland was known as the land of saints and scholars, so there would have been a lot of hauntings, I'd have imagined, over around Galway, and there's little islands off the coast of there. The Gaeltacht, which is where they predominantly speak Gaelic. They don't speak Irish or English. Um, the secondary school children actually pay quite a lot of money to go to the Gaeltacht for uh, a few weeks in the summer, so as they can pass their exams in Irish, because they won't be answered. They won't get any requests they need. Um, unless they say it in Irish, they won't get their needs met. So it's cruel to be kind um, way of teaching, but the kids do come home and they speak perfect, fluent Gaelic, and well, I should be calling it Oscuelga. Um, so it's very surprising to me that along the moors of the Gaeltachts that there wouldn't be ghost stories. I'd imagined there would have been. Now, County Westmeath is right beside me, and we have haunted houses just um, dotted all around County Westmeath. So I'm surprised to read that. That's all I'm saying. Um, I just and there would be a lot of monasteries and nunneries and oh look, Samantha, I forgot. I'm reading a book that was written back in the 1800s. So at the time of this publishing and research that went into this, there probably was no hauntings in Connacht. I'm just talking about today. Like I'd imagine there would have been. Then I realised how old these research stories are. So um, I'm gone off chasing squirrels again. Anyway, the next story. Mrs. Archison of County Roscommon sends the following. Emo House in County Westmeath, a very old mansion since pulled down, was purchased by my grandfather for his son, my father. The latter had only been living in it for a few days when knocking commenced at the hall door. Naturally, he thought it was somebody playing tricks or endeavouring to frighten him away. One night he had the lobby window open directly over the door. The knocking commenced and he looked out. It was a very bright night and there was no porch he could see at the door distinctly. The knocking continued, but he did not see the knocker above move. Another night he sat up expecting his brother, but as the latter did not come, he went to bed. Finally, the knocking became so loud and insistent that he felt sure his brother must have arrived. He went downstairs and opened the door, but no one was there. Still convinced that his brother was there, he had gone around the yard to put up his horse. He went out, but scarcely had he gone 20 yards from the door when the knocking recommenced behind his back. On turning around, he could see no one. After this, the knocking got very bad, so much so that he could not rest. All this time, he did not mention the strange occurrence to anyone. One morning, he went up through the fields between 4 and 5 o'clock. To his surprise, he found the herd out feeding cattle. My father asked him why he was up so early. He replied that he could not sleep. Why? Asked my father. You know why yourself, sir, the knocking. He then found that this man had heard it all the time, though he slept at one end of the long house. My father was advised to take no notice of it, for it would go as it came. Though at this time it was continuous and very loud, and so it did. The country people said it was the late resident who just could not rest. Sorry. Hi, Shmita. Um, my chest is making weird sounds. that usually only happens when there's somebody trying to have me say something. But I'm reading ghost stories. I'm not going to say nothing. It's for another time. I'm busy. Okay, back to the story. We had another curious and most eerie experience in this house. A former rector was staying the night with us, and as the evening wore on, we commenced to tell ghost stories. He relented some remarkable experiences, and as we were talking, the drawing room doors suddenly opened wide as possible, and then slowly closed again. It was a calm night, and at any rate, it was a heavy double door which never flies open, however strong the wind may be blowing. Everyone in the house was in bed, as it was after 12 o'clock, except for three persons who witnessed this: Vi, myself, my daughter, and the rector. That to me sounds like the score. The effect on the latter was the most marked, which was the rector. He was a big, strong, jovial man and a good athlete, but when he saw that door open, he quivered like an aspen leaf. A strange story of a haunting in which nothing was seen, but in which the same noises were heard by different people, is sent by one of the participants, who does not wish to have her name disclosed. She says, when staying for a while in the country house in the north of Ireland some years ago, I was awakened on several nights by hearing the tramp, tramp of horses' hoofs. Sometimes it sounded as if they were walking on paving stones, while at other times I had the impression that they were going around in a large space and as if someone was using a whip on them. I heard neighing and champing of bits, and so formed the impression that they were carriage horses. I did not mind it much at first, as I thought the stables must be near that part of the house. After hearing these noises several times, I began to get curious. So one morning I made a tour of the place. I found that the side of the house I occupied overlooked a neglected garden which was mostly used for drying clothes. I also discovered that the stables were right at the back of the house, so it would be impossible for me to hear any noises of that quarter. At any rate, there was only one farm horse left, and this was securely fastened up every night. Also, there were no cobblestones around that yard. I mentioned what I had heard to the people of the house, and as they would give me no satisfactory reply, I passed it over. I did not hear those noises every night. One night I was startled out of my sleep by hearing a dreadful disturbance in the kitchen. It sounded as if the dish covers were being taken off the wall and dashed violently on the flagged floor. At length, I got up and opened the door of my bedroom, and just as I did so, an appalling crash resounded through the house. I waited to see if there was any light to be seen, or footsteps to be heard, but nobody was stirring. There was only one servant in the house, the other persons being my host, his wife, and a baby, who had all retired early. Next morning, I described the noises in the kitchen to the servant, and she said she had often heard them, and then told her about the tramping of horses. She replied that she herself had never heard it, but that other persons who had occupied my room had had experiences similar to mine. I asked her, was there any explanation? She said no, except that a story was told of a gentleman who had lived there some years ago and was very much addicted to racing and gambling. and that he was shot one night in that house. For the remainder of my visit, I was removed to another part of the house, and I heard no more noises. A house in the north of Ireland, near that locality, which is eternally famous for having furnished the material for the last trial for witchcraft in the country, is said to be haunted. The reason being that it is built on a site of disused and very ancient graveyard. It is said that when some repairs were being carried out, 9 human skulls were unearthed. It would be interesting to ascertain how many houses in Ireland were traditionally built on such unpleasant sites, and if they all bear the reputation of being haunted. The present writer knows of one in the south which is so situated, and this is supported to a certain extent by documentary evidence from the 13th century down, and which in consequence has an uncanny reputation. But concerning the above house, it has been found almost impossible to get any information. It is said that strange noises were frequently heard there, which sometimes seemed as if cartloads of stones were being drawn down one of the cables. On one occasion, an inmate of the house lay dying upstairs. A friend went up to see the sick person, and on proceeding to pass through the bedroom door, was pressed and jostled as if by some unseen person, hurriedly leaving the room. On entering, it was found that the sick person had just passed away. An account of an unpleasant haunting is described by Mr. W. S. Thompson, who vouches for the substantial accuracy of it and also furnishes the names of 2 men still living who attended the station. We give it as it stands, with the comment that some of the details seem to have been grossly exaggerated by local raconteurs. In the year 1869, a ghost made its presence manifest in the house of a Mr. M in County Cavan. In the daytime, it resided in the chimney, but at night it left its quarters and subjected the family to considerable annoyance. During the day, hold on now a second, I have to plug this one in. During the day, they could cook nothing, as showers of soot would be sent down the chimney on top of every pot and pan that was placed on the fire. At night, the various members of the family, I'm sorry, I had to plug in my phone. I'm just making sure it's charging. Yes. At night, the various members of the family would be dragged out of bed by the hair and pulled around the house. When anyone ventured to light a lamp, it would immediately be put out, while chairs and tables would be sent dancing around the room. At last, matters reached such a pitch that the family found it impossible to remain any longer in the house. The night before they left, Mrs. M was severely handled, and her boots left facing the door as a gentle hint for her to be off. Before they departed, some of the neighbours went to the house and saw the ghost, and even described to Mr. Thompson what they had seen. According to one man, it appeared that in the shape of a human being with a pig's head and long tusks. Another described it as a horse with an elephant's head and a headless man seated on its back. Finally, a station was held at the house by 7 priests, at which all the neighbours attended. I'll explain what a station is now. I think they still go on. I know when I was a child, we would have had stations. We lived out the country, and each house took a turn at doing the station. A station. I'm not sure if it's once a year or twice a year. But my mother was delighted only to be having the stations because she'd get the house done up from top to bottom, and and she was very she delighted with this, having to get this done, because the priest was coming to, and it was just mass in the house, and all the neighbours would attend the mass, and an altar would be put up in the sitting room or the living room, and it would have the candles and the Bible and the whole lot, and white cloth, white linen cloth to cover the table. The priest would stand behind it and give mass and Holy Communion, and then after the mass was done, the men retired to a different room to have their talk and their chat and everything else, and they would be served by the ladies of the house, which the whole road of people that would be attending the station would spend the day baking. There would be buns and cakes and sandwiches, cocktail sausages, you name it. It was laid out at the stations, and the mother only loved this because of attention, and she just loved it. She loved getting dolled up, and she loved being the hostess. So the ladies would attend the men first, and they would bring them down the food and sandwiches, tea, coffee. There was no alcohol served with this because it was technically a mass. And then whatever was left over of the apple tarts and cakes, buns, sandwiches, sausages, whatever was laid out, whatever was left over then was left in the kitchen, where the ladies would have their little get together and cup of tea, cup of coffee. The kids would be with the women, and they would have their own drinks, like Diet Coke. Well, there was no diet drinks back then, but Coke and my waddy. That's a cordial. I'm not sure what. I'm sure you have my waddy in America. But that's what a station was. It was mass in the house to bless the road for the next 6 months, and the people on the road for the next 6 months. And then the next person took it on, and then everybody else attended their station, and made baked goods and cakes and sandwiches, and the whole shenanigans would start all over again in the next neighbour's house. So to bless the road for the next 6 months. So that's what a station was. Now, did I finish that part of the story? No, I just got as far as station. Yeah. So finally, a station, which is the mass, was held at the house by 7 priests, at which all of the neighbours attended. The station commenced after sunset, and everything in the house had to be uncovered, lest the evil spirit should find any resting place. A free passage was left out of the door into the street. Oh God, I do remember that too. You'd always want to be the summer the summer station, because if it was any of the winter months, because it was nighttime, and oh my God, the house would be freezing, absolutely freezing. So you always wanted it June, July, August time to have your station. So the women would have a little bit of a barney over who was next, and who was next to have the station on the road, and who. Oh, no, it was nearly like organising a wedding. These stations, it was crazy, and I was only a child. I think the last one we had, I was probably maybe 9 or 10. Yeah. So anyway, a free passage was left out of the door onto the street, where many people were kneeling. About 5 minutes after the station opened, a rumbling noise was heard, and a black barrel rolled out with an unearthly din. Though to some coming up the street it appeared to be the shape of a black horse, with a bull's head and a headless man seated thereon. From this time, the ghost gave no further trouble after the station. The same gentleman also sends an account of a haunted shop in which the members of his family have some very unpleasant experiences. In October 1882, my father, William Thompson, took over the grocery and spirit business from a Dr. S., to whom it had been left by will. My sister was put in charge of the business, and she slept on the premises at night, but she was not there by herself very long until she found things amiss. The third night, matters were made so unpleasant for her that she had to get up out of bed more dead than alive, and go across the street to Mrs. M., the servant at the RIC barracks, with whom she remained until the morning. That must be Cavan barracks, so we must be still. Oh yeah, we are still in Cavan. The last 3 stories have been about the same town in Cavan, with whom she remained until the morning. She stated that as she lay in bed, half awake and half asleep, she saw a man enter the room, who immediately seized her by the throat and well nigh choked her. She had only sufficient strength left to grasp, "Lord, save me," when instantly the man vanished. She also said that she heard noises as if every bottle and glass in the shop was smashed to atoms. Yet, in the morning, everything would be found intact. My brother was in charge of the shop one day, as my sister had to go to Belturbet and do some Christmas shopping. He expected her to return to the shop that night, but as she did not do so, he was preparing to go to bed at about 1 o'clock, when suddenly a terrible noise was heard. The light was extinguished, and the tables and chairs commenced to dance about the floor, and some of them struck him on the shins. Upon this, he left the house, declaring that he had seen the devil. Possibly this ghost had been a rabid teetotaler in the flesh, and continued to have a dislike to publicans' trade after he had become discarnate. At any rate, the present occupants, who follow a different avocation, do not appear to be troubled. Ghosts are no respecters of persons or places, and take up their quarters where they are least expected. One can hardly imagine them entering an RIC barracks and annoying the stalwart inmates thereof. A barracks is where army men, sergeants, and the like live. Well, it's where they work. Most of them live in as well in the barracks. Anyway, and annoying the stalwart inmates thereof. Yet more than one tale of a haunted police barracks, this is a police barrack, was been sent to us, nay, in its proper place, we shall relate the appearance of a deceased member of the force, uniform and all. The following personal experiences are contributed by an ex-RIC constable who requested that all names should be suppressed. The barracks of which I am about to speak has now disappeared owing to the construction of a new railway line. It was a 3-story house with large airy compartments and splendid accommodation. This particular night I was on guard after the constables had retired to their quarters. I took my palliasse, I'm not sure what that is, downstairs to the I took myself downstairs to the day room and laid it on 2 forms alongside 2 6-foot tables which were placed end to end in the centre of the room. As I expected a patrol in the oh lordy. As I expected a patrol in at midnight, and as another had to be sent out when it arrived. I didn't promise myself uh, a very restful night, so I threw myself on the bed, intending to read a bit, as there was a large a large lamp on the table. Scarcely had I commenced to read when I felt as if I was being pushed off the bed. At first, I thought I must have fallen asleep, so to make sure, I got up, took a few turns around the room, and then deliberately lay down again and took up my book. Scarcely had I done so when the same thing happened, and though I resisted with all my strength, I was finally landed on the floor. My bed was close to the table, and the pushing came from that side, so that if anyone was playing a trick on me, they could not do so without being under the table. I looked, but there was no visible presence there. I felt shaky, but changed my couch to another part of the room and had no further unpleasant experience. Many times after I was on guard in the same room, but I always took care not to place my couch in that particular spot. One night, not long afterwards, we were all asleep in the dormitory, when we were awakened in the small hours of the morning by the guard rushing upstairs, dashing through the room, and jumping into the bed in the farthest corner behind its occupant. There he lay gasping, unable to speak for several minutes, and even then we couldn't get a coherent account of what befell him. It appears he fell asleep and suddenly woke to find himself on the floor and a body rolling over him. Several men volunteered to go downstairs with him, but he absolutely refused to leave the dormitory and stayed there until morning. Nor would he even remain downstairs at night without having a comrade with him. It ended in his applying for an exchange of stations. Another time I returned off duty at midnight, and after my comrade, a married sergeant, had gone outside to his quarters, I went to the kitchen to change my boots. There was a good fire on, and it looked so comfortable that I remained toasting my toes on the hob and enjoying my pipe. The lockup was lean-to one. The lockup was a lean-to one-story building off the kitchen and was divided into 2 cells, one opening into the kitchen, the other into that cell. I was smoking away quietly when I suddenly heard inside the lockup a dull, heavy thud, just like the noise a drunken man would make by crashing down on all fours. I wondered who the prisoner could be, as I didn't see anyone that night who seemed a likely candidate for free lodgings. However, as I heard no other sound, I decided I would tell the guard in order that he might look after him. As I took my candle from the table, I happened to glance at the lockup, and to my surprise, I saw the outer door was open. My curiosity being roused, I looked inside and found the inner door also open. There was nothing in either cell except the two empty plank beds, and these were immovable as they were firmly fixed to the walls. I betook myself to my bedroom in that much quicker than I was in the habit of doing. I mentioned that in this barracks there was a demolished oh sorry. I mentioned that this barracks was demolished owing to the construction of a new railway line. It was the last obstacle removed, and in the meantime, workmen came from all points of the compass. One day, a powerful navvy was brought into the barracks, a total collapse from drink, and absolutely helpless. After his neckwear was loosened, he was carried up to the lockup and laid on the plank bed, the guard being instructed to visit him periodically, lest he should smother. He was scarcely half an hour there. This was in the early evening, when the most unmerciful screaming brought all hands up to the lockup to find the erstwhile helpless man standing on the plank bed and grappling with a, to us, invisible foe. We took him out and mentioned that a man had tried to choke him and was still there when we came to his relief. The strange thing was that when he was shivering with fright, the perfectly sober, though in the ordinary course of events he would not be in that condition for at least 7 or 8 hours, the story spread like wildfire through the town, but the inhabitants were not in the least surprised, and one old man told us that many strange things had happened in that house long before it became a police barracks. Well, that's where I'm going to leave it today. On that story about the barracks, and I hope everybody enjoys it, and that that won't be too scared tonight. I know these stories aren't really frightening at all. Well, now I suppose if you came across a ghost in those manners, I suppose they would be very scary. But to tell, they're just fireside tales and just entertainment. Um, so thanks whoever's listening to this, and I'm very glad you joined us, and I shall speak to you all soon. Hopefully tomorrow night. Good night and God bless.